So here's one more thing I want to leave you guys with, and I meant to show this to you guys last week, but we just ran out of time. But I want to copy this code, and we're going to go back to Visual Studio. We're going to go to our, let's create a new file. Logistic. Here's another thing where I'm going to rattle some cages, but you guys need to get used to this because, again, we are professional data scientists in here, right? So, professional data scientists write programs, not scripts. So, this is a script. This is a pretty straightforward script with sequential programming, right? But if you want to get out there in the real world and you really want to, if you really want to impress on a code test, or you really want to impress somebody on your first day, because you landed a job and you want to show that you work in a professional environment, this is a type of code I want to encourage all of you to start with or start working on, right? You should have an entry point. You should be pointing to a main method. The main method sits here, and it's basically just using the same code we did before, but in a way that's broken out by methods. You have your imports at the top, you have the methods that you're going to need, and then you have the main, right? So in main, you're loading your data, right? So that means you're calling your load data method, which is really the same as before, right? Same lines, but it's a much more organized, much more reusable way, and it's also commented, right? ChatGPT added the comments for us. But this is how you lay out professional code. And I have a template, and I want to show you one more thing that ChatGPT does not add, is you also want to add a template header, or a file header that always sits at the very top of all of the code that you write, okay? So you're going to describe what the file does. In your old school files, your old school guys, they also include the name of the file at the top. That's something that's kind of fallen out of practice, but you are going to come across some files that do that. But you always describe what your code does and any inputs and outputs that you need. And then you always write a copyright. Your employer or your client usually owns the copyright. So that's me. I have my own LLC. And then you always list yourself as the prepared by person or the programmed by person, because in the real world, you do not own the copyright to your code. That's called your stock and trade, right? The stock and trade is that you wrote the code, but they're paying you for it, so the company owns the code. You never put a copyright of yourself. And then that's where you start the rest of your Python. So if we run this Python will run the same as it did before, right? It's not going to be any different, but it's much more readable, and it kind of adds that professional polish to your code. All right? So I want to leave that with you. I meant to leave that with you last time, but I want to make sure that you are also just taking the time to do that extra polish to your code. Okay? So if you have any questions on that, let me know. I might put this file up on our Discord so that you guys can see an example of it. But start working away from notebooks, start working away from scripts, and start thinking more about programs where you're taking the time to create your own methods. And then the next iteration of this is to create your own classes, right? In theory, this could be its own class, and it should be its own class, right? We could easily rewrite this to be its own class. But these are the types of things that I want you to think about when you're getting out from to the real world, okay? Explore the beauty of nature. Thank you for the tip. How does this compare with OOP? Yeah, great question. Love the question. Breaking out your code like this. Let me go back to that. Breaking out your code like this with a main entry point and your main methods. This is the start to OOP. The next iteration, as I mentioned earlier, is to take all of these others, these supporting methods, and create a class out of them. You can absolutely do that, right? And creating classes is your start to object-oriented programming, right? It's more reusable. It can be consumed in many different ways, so on and so on, right? So yeah, great question. And this is where it starts. So explore the beauty. If you want to kind of take that as your next step, that would be a next step. Take this code here and break it out into a class. That's a great step towards OOP. And if you send me that, or you create that in a coding test that somebody gives you, that's like, like what you're doing, right? Like you're adding that extra professionalism to your code when you start writing like this, and then you take it to a class and you consume, and then you instantiate the class properly and you use the class like you're showing some really good stuff, right? That's a strong application if you're still trying to, land a data science job, okay?